We have multiple big flare players on the Earth-facing disk, which means radio blackouts are on the menu. And along with some fast solar wind, it looks like we might have an Earth-directed, stealthy solar storm. Those stories and more in the news this week. This space weather forecast is sponsored in part by Millersville University. Come get certified in broadcast space weather. Visit millersville.edu/SWEN. Space weather this week gets more interesting by the minute. As we take a look at our Earth-facing disk, you can see a big coronal hole that's rotating in through the Earth strike zone right now. It's sending us some fast solar wind, which could bring a little bit of aurora to high latitudes, especially over the next 24 hours. Maybe a slight possibility of some aurora down at mid-latitudes, but it won't last all that long. Meanwhile, we also have a big coronal hole in the south, and that will be rotating into the Earth strike zone in about a week. But take a look in between the two. Do you see that bright region beginning to emerge right around center disk? Well, this region early on the 22nd launches this big puffy kind of thing. This is what looks to be an Earth-directed stealthy solar storm. This storm could reach Earth around late on the 22nd or 7th. Late on the 26th into the 27th. So we could get a little bit of aurora from that, but it's really hard to tell. I don't know if the models are going to pick this one up. Meanwhile, not to be outdone, region 3102 fires off a big solar storm to the west of Earth. It's not going to hit Earth. And not to be outdone again, region 3110 then launches a big solar storm off to the east. Neither of those are Earth-directed, but they sure made some really good eye candy. On top of that, we have another big flare player. That's region 3105. This region is one to watch as well because we could get some big flares from it and radio blackouts. So it's kind of hard to know where to put your eyes this week, and we're going to keep our eyes on all of them if we've got enough of them. Meanwhile, as we take a look at the far-sighted sun, now this is stereo A and it's looking at the sun just a tiny bit from the side. You can see region 3102 launching that big solar storm off to the west of Earth, and then beyond it you can see the big coronal hole in the south. And look over here in the east though, in this coronal hole you can look at region 3110 really beginning to emerge very rapidly. And when we see that kind of activity, that means that these regions are very unstable. So this is going to be a really good flare player and obviously a solar storm producer. So we're going to keep our eyes on it. And meanwhile, amateur radio operators and emergency responders and GPS users expect those radio blackouts to be on the menu. Switching to our moon, we are now passing through the new moon phase, with the new moon being on the 25th. And even by the 29th, the moon will still be only about 14% illuminated. So you night sky watchers, if you want to catch those dim objects in the sky and possibly some aurora, now is your perfect chance. Switching to our solar storm conditions and aurora possibilities over the coming week, we are anticipating the fast solar wind from that coronal hole that's rotating in through the Earth strike zone right now. As a matter of fact, we're beginning to experience a little bit of it already. So at high latitudes, NOAA is expecting minor storm conditions with up to about a 50% chance of a major storm over the next day or two. And then things will settle down a little bit. But remember, we also have that stealthy Earth-directed solar storm that's going to hit us somewhere around the 26th, late on the 26th into the 27th, and that could bump us back up and basically extend the storming for a little bit longer. So we could be storming, especially at high latitudes, in through midweek. So this looks like a good chance for you aurora photographers, if you're at high latitudes, to get some decent shows. Now, mid-latitudes, we're only expecting active conditions, but we do have up to about a 30% chance of minor storm, and then things again will settle down with that fast solar wind for just a skosh, and then pick back up either late on the 26th or into the 27th because of that stealthy solar storm, and we could get back into storm conditions, but most likely it's going to be pretty mild. We may not even notice it, just a little bit of an enhancement. So those aurora photographers at mid-latitudes, well, you know, you could get a little bit of a show. I'm not sure it's going to be super overwhelming. Don't expect it to be monstrous, but it could give you a little bit if you're a dedicated chaser. Switching to our solar flare and particle radiation storm outlook over the coming week, well, we do have a lot of big flare players on the Earth-facing disk this week, and that means the chance for radio blackouts is staying pretty high. In fact, we're all in the yellow. NOAA's giving us about a 30% chance of M-class flares and even a 5% chance of X-class flares. And this means GPS users need to stay vigilant because GPS reception, especially near dawn or near dusk, could be a bit impacted. Now, luckily, the solar flux is staying high for amateur radio operators and emergency responders, so your dayside radio reception and radio propagation should remain in the good range, despite all the noise on the bands that I'm sure you're getting this week. So just have to deal with that. It's easily going to continue over this week. At least your radio propagation will remain in the good range. But also, when we get that solar storm hitting, both you GPS users and your radio operators, just know the night side could be a bit dicey, especially near aurora. So also now when we take a look at our radiation storm possibilities, we are sitting in the green. Everything is normal right now. So despite the fact that we have big flare players on the Earth-facing disk, it doesn't look like we have any risk for radiation storms, and that's likely going to continue easily through this week. So the space weather this week continues to be interesting, and it's changing very rapidly. Not only do we have some fast solar wind that's hitting Earth right now, and that could bring aurora, especially down to high latitudes over the next day or so, with even some sporadic shows at mid-latitudes, but we also have that Earth-directed stealthy solar storm that could be hitting Earth around late on the 26th into the 27th. I don't know if we're going to see any modeling on this one, so it's just going to kind of have to be an educated guess there, and it might not be a big impact, but it could extend some of the aurora that we've been seeing from the fast solar wind in for an extra day or two before things settle down. So aurora photographers at high latitudes, you definitely should get some good shows. At mid latitudes, well, if you're a dedicated chaser, it might be worth a look. Now, amateur radio operators and emergency responders, well, you know, we've got multiple big flare players on the Earth-facing disk, and that does mean radio blackouts are back on the menu. The nice thing is that radio propagation on Earth's dayside should remain in the good range, even though the bands will likely be noisy with the chances of these radio blackouts, especially because these big flare players are also big solar storm producers. So, you know, there could be a lot more in store, and expect the forecast to be changeable very rapidly. Now, all for you GPS users, well, things aren't looking so great for you right now. Not only do we have big flare players on the Earth-facing disk, and that causes radio blackouts, which makes dawn and dusk really kind of dicey, but the solar flux is also high, and that causes issues for you now down near low latitudes. But then also, once that solar storm hits and the fast solar wind picks up, well, then that's going to make GPS reception a bit glitchy in and around aurora on Earth's night side. So just stay vigilant and make sure you calibrate your magnetometers often if you are a drone pilot. I'm Tamitha Skov, the Space Weather Woman. Thank you for watching.